Now, I don't know if you will find my Dogman encounter to be frightening or particularly scary, but for me and my wife, it was. You see, back in 2018, we had just moved to Weatherford, Texas. The property I bought sat on 23 acres of land, and I absolutely loved it. But as I started to explore the area around me and getting to know my neighbors much better, I realized on the back end side of my property, beyond the fence line, was this other massive piece of property, and no one seemed to know who the landowner was. So I take it upon myself to go and explore, climb over the fence, and start looking around. And that's when things started to get extremely weird. Imagine a scene. You climb the fence, you walk into the woods, and you climb the fence 50 yards, and then you come into this wide open clearing. I mean, a perfectly manicured circle in the middle of the woods. When you go beyond that clearing, you come to another 50, 60 yards worth of woods, and then another perfectly cleared circle in the woods. I'm standing there finding myself completely and totally intrigued with the fact that someone would take the time to do something like this. So I start to work my way to the east. As I'm working eastward, I go through about 50, 60 yards of woods, and there's another clearing. Now pause right here and let me say this to you. Back then, when this happened, I had no clue that Dogman existed. Knew nothing about a Dogman. Alright, let's pick up right here. I leave that property, come back home, me and my wife have dinner, everything is fine, no problems, absolute perfection. 2 days later, I see my neighbor. He says, hey, we don't go over there on that property. So now he and I are talking, and I'm asking him, well, who owns this land? He says he doesn't know. And I'm asking him, well, listen, who owns this land? He goes on to tell me that not only he doesn't know who owns it, but none of the other neighbors know who owns that land. Listen, call me naive, call me stupid, call me whatever the hell you want. But in my mind, I was just curious because I'd never seen anything like this. So again, I cross the fence and go on to the land. This time I start working my way towards the west, just to see if it was all the same. Well, as I'm working my way westwards through these woods, I come to a clearing, and I see what looks like this coyote puppy laying next to a tree. Now, in my mind, no big deal. It's a coyote pup. I see it laying around. I don't see the parents. I'm not worried about it. I keep on going on about my business. And sure enough, no matter how far you went in any direction, it was that same symmetry. 50, 60, no more than 70 yards of woods, and then these clear-cut circles. And I'm thinking to myself, why would someone do something like this? What is the purpose of this? Now I'm working my way back home, and I get to that area where that pup is laying down by the tree, and it's still there laying down. And I'm saying to myself, okay, maybe this thing is dead. Innocently, I grab a rock, toss it in a direction, and I can't throw that well, so I miss. I pick up another rock. This time my goal is to throw the rock and hit the tree right above where it is. But nope, that rock takes a trajectory that makes it land and hit this thing right in the rib cage. Now understand, I'm no more than 20, 25 yards away, and if you ever been punched in the chest or punched someone else in the chest, you know how it sounds, that kind of hollow, like doom sound. That's the sound that I heard. This thing rolls over and stands up on two legs and starts to look around, and then it spots me. Looks down at that rock, then looks at me. I pause right here for a moment in the story, because right then and there, it had not registered to me mentally that this thing was standing up on two legs. I mean, I saw it standing up on two legs, but it hadn't registered in my mind that it was actually standing up on two legs. I don't know if that makes sense to you, because it didn't make much sense to me. It was almost as if my brain was not comprehending what it was seeing. Like my brain was telling me it's on all fours, but I'm looking at it standing up on its hind two legs. It looks at me, turns its head, starts to growl, then turns around and takes off running. Now I'm pretty sure you're saying to yourself what I was saying to myself in that very moment, which is, that was some weird shit. So now I'm hurrying to get off of this property. I climb over the fence and head on home, and everything is quiet for the next 24 hours. However, that night after, my wife and I are sitting in the living room watching TV. Matter of fact, I could tell you what we were watching. We were watching the Barbecue Championship on Netflix when it sounds like something jumps on the roof. And when I say jump on the roof, imagine a 200, 300 pound person literally jumping up and down on your roof. That's what it sounds like. You hear it hit the back side of the house, land on the roof, and then scurry up to the peak of the roof and then down towards the front side of the roof, right above where my wife and I are watching television. And I need you to understand, there is no mistaking what we heard and then what happened next. There was absolutely no mistaking what this was, because we hear this growling sound being projected down on top of our heads. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced having a sound directed downward at you. It was almost as if someone had taken a subwoofer speaker and they were holding it over our heads and playing a growling noise. Listen to me when I tell you this. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The hairs on my arm felt like they started to lay down. I had this feeling, this strong urge to completely and totally urinate on myself. Looking over at my wife, she's frozen in place with that dead eye stare. You know how it is when you stare forward and you focus on your hearing? That's how she is. She's stuck there staring forward, and you can tell that her audible senses are being completely and totally overridden by this sound, just like mine's were. Then I hear this thing move towards the front of the house on the roof. We hear the thud of it landing on the ground, and now I want to get up and move, and I can't. I've never found myself in any situation where my body did not work. It was almost as if the signals coming from my brain were not going to my legs and to my arms. I was stuck in place. And that's when we both saw it. I need you to understand something. We out in the country in Weatherford, Texas. Do we have blinds? Yes. But we typically keep the blinds open. Do we have curtains? Yes. But the way my wife has our curtains arranged, they slope down and then they hook on the sides, leaving this kind of triangular pattern where the curtains are open. Why? Because we live in a country. Nobody comes out here to bother us. Ooh, boy, let me tell you, that night, I really, really wish that I could kind of rewind time and close those blinds before the sun went down, because what we saw looking at us through that window was absolutely terrifying, and I can describe it to you unlike anybody else can ever describe it to you, because I saw this giant eyeball the size of the cup coaster that was sitting on the table in front of me, yellow with a huge, gigantic black pupil the size of my thumb. And I've listened to some people tell their Dogman encounters about how Dogman was looking at them, but no. I don't know if those people are telling the truth, because let me tell you something. They don't look head on at you, like stare you down like a human being. No. This thing was looking through one eye at us. It made a point of putting one eye right at the window and looking at us with that one freaking eye, making sure it made contact. Then it started to slowly turn its head, and you saw the snout, and then you saw the tip of the snout, and then you saw the other eye as it adjusts its entire head to fit into that space to show itself to me and my wife. It was intentionally showing itself to us. And this entire time, I couldn't move. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying to you, man. I felt absolutely helpless. My wife is sitting right there next to me. I can't move. There's nothing that I could do to defend this woman because my brain is not working. It lets out another growl. And this time, I feel it in my stomach and in my intestines. And then it starts to breathe on the window, these hard, huffing, puffing breaths. Looking over at my wife, she's now laid out on the sofa, convulsing. It looks at me, looks at her, looks at me, and then looks at her, and then turns and goes away. Now let me stop right here and let me say this to you. I heard people tell stories about how the Dogman is like a lion and it projects these vibrations that freeze their prey, and then they eat them and they kill them. I don't know nothing about none of that. I don't know if it's true. I don't know what is false. I'm not saying any of that is true or false. All I'm telling you is what we experienced. My wife was sitting there having seizures and convulsions. I don't know if it was because an adrenaline dump. I don't know if it was because she was overwhelmed with adrenaline. I don't know what it was. But I know when I was finally able to move and I started tending to her, she was sitting there shaking. I'm talking about eyes rolled in the back of her head, shaking. Listen, I've told this story to other folks and they didn't believe me, and they told me if I was in that situation, I would have grabbed my gun and I would have shot it. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have shot it. I couldn't move. The first time I came to realize there was more in the woods or Olympic National Forest was over 10 years ago. Back then, I was in my early 40s, in great shape, and life was good on every angle. Now, I understand that nowadays people have a lot of struggles, but for me, I grew up having a father who amassed a whole hell of a lot of wealth. And that allowed me as a young man just to pursue my hobby and my interests. My number one hobby and passion was wildlife biology. I'd always loved wildlife and the outdoors. And at age 40, I was living my dream. But in 2013, everything changed. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever woken up from a dream and felt like it was real? Most people have. Well, imagine experiencing something you wish was a dream and having to come to grips with the fact that it was real. And no matter how many times you tell yourself it didn't happen, the empirical evidence is constantly in front of you, and your body bears the scars to prove it. I'll never, ever forget this day, July 15th. The details of my report are sketched in my mind. 74.7 degrees, light wind, sunny day, the epitome of beauty. I started out that day like any other day of my life. I had been to this location 6 times already and never had an issue in these woods. Now, if you want to know the area, I'm happy to share it with you. I advise you not to go there, but I'm more than happy to share it with you. It's upriver, 6 miles east of Fork. I was there doing an assessment on the river ecosystem and its effect on the river otters. Now, if you're asking yourself, how in the hell did you get an assignment to study river otters? The crazy thing is, it goes back to all the climate change activists that have come into this field over the past 20 years. You see, back in the day, people understood that the climate was affected by the sun, that everything on this planet was affected by one powerful force and one powerful force alone, that is the sun. But over the years, we had these woke people sneak in who worship Mother Gaia, Mother Earth, and they believe deep down in their hearts that human beings are a virus that are killing this planet, despite the evidence that this planet is millions of years old. So I'm gonna stop right there and get off my soapbox and let me go back to my story. Anyway, I'm there right along the riverbanks when I see these 2 otters come swimming down the river. No problem, it's 2 otters, they're swimming, cool. That's what I'm here for, right? Then I see 4 more, then 6 more, then 8 more, then 12 more. Next thing you know, it's 40 of these otters swimming down river directly at me. Imagine the scene. I'm down on one knee, I got my backpack on my back, and I have my notebook and pen in hand. I need you to understand something. 2 otters aren't dangerous at all. You can kick them away from you, go on about your business. 5 or 10 can be a problem. 20 to 30, you got a problem on your hands. Next thing I know, I'm under full assault by these otters for no reason whatsoever. Now I'm scrambling up the side of the riverbank, trying to get away from them, kicking them off of me. They're biting my ankles, biting my legs. I got my backpack whipped off my back. I'm swinging the backpack with one hand. I'm swinging my notebook with the other hand, trying to get these things away from me. When I finally get up on top of the riverbank, away from the water, they all turn and retreat. Now listen to me when I say this to you. An incident like that is not only just traumatic to you, but it has these negative connotations on the rest of your career. Because I go back to the field office, I'm telling people bada bing, bada boom, what's going on, and next thing you know, everybody starts calling me the Otter Man. Listen to me. Now listen to me and listen to me good. It's okay when people make fun of you. I got tough skin. I'm not worried about it. But Otter Man, come on, bro. That was the worst freaking nickname I could have ever been given. I'm talking about traveling to national conferences and people on the national level calling me the Otter Man. So guess what? I decided I was going to embrace the whole thing. I am the Otter Man. You want to call me Otter Man? I'm Otter Man. Guess what? I specialize in otters. Nonetheless, a few days later, I go back to the same location. Am I trepidatious? Yes, absolutely. 100% trepidatious about going back to the exact same spot where otters jumped me. But I go there anyway. Why? Because I'm not a coward and I get paid to do my job. This time I'm there and I'm saying to myself, there's no possible way that something like this could ever happen again. That was a freak accident, right? Nope, wrong. Wronger than wrong could possibly be. Because as I'm there, standing at the edge of the water, I look up and no, it's not 5 or 10 otters. It looks like 200 freaking otters coming down the river at the same time. It's so many of them that they are making their own waves in the water. Scares the living out of me. So much so that I climb back up the riverbank and I watch as they all go by. And right then and there is when the weirdness starts to happen. Now, hit the pause button in your imagination for a moment and let me explain something to you. You should be seeing those otters going right down the river in your mind. But pause right here. Let me say this. I've heard a lot of Dogman witnesses say stuff like, the area went quiet. And I don't really know how accurate that is because that's not exactly what I experienced. What I experienced was this motionlessness. Like this still. Quietness is like there wasn't a sound. No, I heard them otters in the water. But it was just like this stillness came around the area around. Like everything around me started to slow down and it was just still. I'm standing there looking at those otters when I get this feeling, that feeling of someone running up on me. And I turn to my right, there it is, the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. 7 foot tall, skinny, emaciated, lightly sparse fur on his chest. You could see this thing's rib cage. And I don't know if it was expecting for nobody to be there, because the look on his face was one of surprise, like, whoa, hold on, there's a human here. I look at it, it looks at me. I look at it, and it looks at me. Now, I need you to understand something. The speed at which this thing came up on me was like that comic book cartoon character Blur. I felt it coming, I saw the blur, and then it was right there standing in front of me, like it came to a dead screeching stop. No sliding, no nothing. And the last thing I remember was turning my attention from its eyes to its nose and observing the moisture on the tip of its nose. And then my vision started to go. I woke 3 hours later, terrified, laying on my back. And as I begin the process of rolling over, coming to my senses to stand up, I realized that I'm standing in a freaking pile of bones. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 bones. I'm talking about 100, 200 different types of bones. Otter bones, even bear skulls. Now listen to me when I say this to you. I can't tell you that this dog man did anything intentionally to physically hurt me. I can't. Now granted, when I stood up and looked down at my leg, it was bleeding. My pants were torn. It had claw marks in it. And my skin had these bruise marks on it, like it grabbed me by the leg and started dragging me and then dropped me right there. I'm standing there looking around. I've already observed the fact that my pants legs are torn and that there's blood on my pants leg. And then I just start to run. Didn't care about direction, didn't care about anything. I just ran and I ran and I ran and I ran and I ran. And somewhere along the line of me just hauling ass through the woods, all of my training kicked in. I remember figuring out my bearing, And I remember turning and going in a direction towards my vehicle. The next thing I remember after that was getting inside the vehicle and closing the door. And not so much the motion of getting inside and closing the door, more so the feeling of safety, security. Like, okay, it can't get me in here. Then I remember being at home in bed. I don't remember driving back out of there. I don't remember anything but being at home and in the bed. The following day, I called in to work and said I wasn't coming in. And then the day after that, my boss insisted that I come in to work. Now, I need you to understand something. I'm known as the otter man. There was no way on the planet that I was telling people in my office that this had just happened. That some kind of werewolf creature scared the hell out of me. I passed out. It dragged me through the woods and placed me on a pile of bones. I wasn't doing it. And on top of that, my boss was giving me flack because this report about these otters was worth a whole hell of a lot of money to our organization. I remember sitting there in his office trying to come up with an excuse as to why I didn't have it done. And I couldn't. I couldn't come up with anything worthwhile, so I just told him I would have it to him by the end of the day. Getting up from that chair, walking out of his office door, headed down the hallway, and I'm thinking to myself, bro, this is about to be the worst report you have ever turned in your entire life. Understand, yes, I've been to that location 6 times, but this study required you got all the correct data. I needed more water samples. I needed actual stool samples from the otters themselves. Didn't have any of that. So now I'm sitting there at my desk trying to figure out how I'm going to put together this janky report when Sarah walks by. Now let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. She was what we called a wildlife biologist OG. When I tell you this woman had been all over the world, her and her husband traveled the entire world doing all kinds of crazy stuff, climbing mountains, swimming in oceans. Just the most insane things on the planet is what she had done. I'm sitting there looking at her and I don't know if it was that woman's intuition, but she says, "What's wrong? What happened?" Now, I need you to remember something. My nickname around the office is Otter Man. I'm not really comfortable sharing what I encountered with anybody, so I blow it off. Nothing's wrong, everything's fine. She says, "No, you've seen something, something's wrong. Talk to me about it." I explained to her, "Listen, I don't feel comfortable discussing this in the office. We can go outside and I'll tell you what happened." So we go outside to her vehicle, sit down, and I start to explain to her exactly what I encountered. The whole 9 yards, the otters swarming, coming down the river, the stillness in the woods, the feeling of something or someone rushing up on me, turning, seeing a blur, and then this thing being right there in my face, breathing on me passing out, waking up in a pile of bones, freaking out, taking off running, and getting back to the vehicle, going home, and not remembering how the hell I got home. I'm telling her all of this, and as I'm telling her this, she starts to cry. Are you listening to me? As I'm telling you this woman starts to cry. I'm talking about an ugly cry where all your makeup starts to run and smear. And I'm saying to myself, you asked me what was going on with me. And all of a sudden, you sitting here crying. Then she starts to unbutton her pants. And I'm saying to myself, what in the hell is going on here? She lifts up her shirt and shows me these scars on her ribs. And when I tell you it looked like a freaking dinosaur had bit her along the side of her rib cage and then decided it was going to twist its head back and forth, that's exactly what her skin looked like. She goes on to explain to me that she had an encounter in the same forest years ago with the exact same thing. It bit her, threw her around, slammed her into a tree. And the only reason why I let her go is because she sprayed bear mace directly down its throat. Imagine my surprise as I'm sitting there watching her tell me this story, tears running down her face, looking at the scars from her injury. Now get this, after she has her emotional breakdown, we're sitting there talking, and I explain to her the situation I find myself in, needing to have this report done. And I tell her, I said, "Listen, I will fudge these numbers before I go out to that location alone. Now, if you go back out there with me, I'll go get the rest of the data. She looks me dead in my eyes and says, I suggest you get to fudging those numbers immediately. Because there's no guarantee that if you run into that thing again, that you're coming back out of those woods. Are you ready to uncover the truth about Bigfoot? Dive into the pages of shocking Bigfoot encounters. What you don't know will scare you. Written by Dog Waters. You can buy it on Amazon today for only $2.99. The link is in the description below. My daughter Lizzie is 5 years old, and for the longest time this little girl was fascinated with playing peekaboo. I mean like nonstop. We're in the kitchen, she wanted to play peekaboo. If she's in the car, she wants to play peekaboo while I'm driving. If she's at home in the bed and ready to go to sleep, before she can go to bed, we had to play peekaboo. Now before I go any further, let me tell you a little bit about where we live. We live in a pretty well-developed area right outside of Nashville, Tennessee. However, my neighborhood backs up to this forest that leads to God knows where. But up until this point, we had never ever had any problems with wild animals in the area. In fact, nobody in the area did. It's July 10th, 2016. Lizzie comes to my room and says, Daddy, you want to play peekaboo with me and Wolfie? My wife and I are in the bed watching TV, and I say, Nah, baby, Daddy's not interested in playing peekaboo right now. He's watching a football game. She left and went back into her room, and my wife and I thought nothing of it. The next night, she comes in my room. I'm reading a book. She says, Daddy, Wolfie looks mad. He won't play peekaboo with me. Can you come see Daddy? So I get up and I'm going to her room with her. And I'm thinking to myself, this whole imaginary friend Wolfie thing is getting completely out of control. We're going to have a talk about this really, really soon. Because I can't deal with this Wolfie thing every night. Lizzie grabs a little small Barbie chair from by her desk and pulls it over to the window. Then she says, Daddy, turn off the lights. He won't play if the light is on. So I walk over, turn off the lights. She grabs the flashlight. She tugs on my shirt until I'm positioned right in front of the window. And she says, cover your eyes. I'm going to shine a light and I'm going to get him to come. So I'm standing there right in front of the window with my eyes covered. She starts giggling. He's coming, Daddy. Keep your eyes closed. A few seconds later, Lizzie stops laughing and says, You ready, Daddy? You ready, Daddy? Say peekaboo. And when I remove my hands, I find myself face to face with what people are calling Dogman. This thing was hunched over, looking down at me through the window. I remember its eyes more than anything. These huge yellow eyes with black pupils, and its snout pressed up against the window, causing it to fog every time it breathed. I grabbed Lizzie, ran into the hallway, and went and got my AR-15 from the back room. By the time I found it and went outside, this thing was gone. When I asked Lizzie, how long had you been playing peekaboo with this thing? She said she had been doing it for 2 weeks. Lizzie said that every time she would cover her eyes, it would cover its eyes with its paws. She called it her friend. Now what I saw was not nobody's friend. Screw that. The following week I had metal storm shutters installed on my property. You know, the kind that roll up and down? That thing will never have an opportunity to play peekaboo with any of us again. Back in 1995, I'm working as a state trooper. It's 10:45 p.m. Imagine the scene. You're on a bridge high above the interstate working a speed trap when an 18-wheeler blows its tires. And you watch from that vantage point as that trailer swerves left, and this guy driving this rig is good because he's able to get it back under control and straighten it out as it's going under the bridge. Then slows it down and comes to a complete stop about 400 yards up the road. The only issue is that the trailer is still partially in the road with the tires blown out. Now, there's light traffic, but it's still enough traffic for some jackass to be fiddling with the radio, not see the trailer, and smash into it. So, now I hop into the cruiser, head to the ramp, and shoot down towards the highway with the lights flashing, parking my vehicle on an angle behind that trailer with the lights flashing, blocking the lane. Then, hop out, take road flares, and walk, placing those flares 10 yards, 20 yards, and 30 yards away in an attempt to make sure that no matter how distracted the driver is, they would have to be a complete and total idiot in order to run into this truck. Now, by the time I've done that, that trucker is out of his truck, approaching me with his eyes wide open and looking at the trailer. Man, these machines are built for redundancy. So the two of us are there standing looking, trying to figure out how in the hell the back 8 tires of this rig exploded. He's there with tears in his eyes saying only God saved his life. And that's when I look at what this man is hauling, and he is hauling fuel. Understand, we're talking. I'm trying to calm him down. He walks back up to the front, climbs into his rig, and calls his company. Now I need to pause right here in the story for a moment so you can clearly see what happens next. He's in the rig, on the passenger side. I'm on the ground looking up at him. Behind us is nothing but woods. And then we both hear this freaking yelling sound like a damn bullhorn is coming from those woods. And after that, everything happens so fast, it's terrifying. You hear trees breaking, too many trees to count. And before I can turn around and look behind me, I see this blur. And then, wham, something smashes into the side of that tanker. The truck rocks, shakes, the wheels right in front of me lift up off the ground. I'm watching this rig go over and up into the air. Then it starts coming back down, and I'm like, holy hell. Understand, his door was open with one leg hanging out. Now, that open door is coming back down on an angle that would slam it directly on top of my head. Instinctively, I fall backwards to the ground, trying not to get hit, landing on my left-hand side. And you know how when you're doing training in jiu-jitsu and you're working on getting from under somebody on the mat, your body's in that shrimp position, and you shrimp out? Well, that's the position that I'm in, facing the backside of his rig, able to see all the way to my patrol car. And that's when I actually lay my eyes on what had just hit that tanker. Understand, it's black with matted fur laying there on the ground. Gasoline is now spilling from the container, and it looks like a 600-pound ball of matted fur. Then it moves, making its quick jerking motion, and I see a head roll up out of that fur. This thing takes a quick glance in my direction, and we lock eyes, and it's nothing less than a movie monster. Pure, unadulterated FX channel quality looking. It has the head of a wolf, but the fur of a dirty, stinky, filthy, smelly dog. I'm talking about a dog who's never seen a pair of shears and a dog who's never ever touched water. It's there less than 15 feet away from me, shaking its head, trying to get its bearings. Then it stands up, but not like any dog I've ever seen. This thing stands up on its 2 hind legs, takes one leaping step, and clears where it was, uphill to the edge of the wood lines, a distance that had to be 40-45 yards. Then a second later, it's gone. I'm still in shock, trying to get up off the ground, when I hear what sounds like one hell of a fight going on in those woods. Listen, we're talking about pitches and decibel levels of sounds that, frankly, I didn't know even existed, and that I haven't heard again since that night. So now I'm back up on my feet staring at those woods. He's done climbed out, asking me what happened. There is gas spilling everywhere. The two of us talk, discussing what the hell that was for about 10 seconds. Then it dawns on me, holy crap, the flares. Now imagine seeing the both of us are racing past that tanker, past my vehicle, to the flare, trying to get to them before the gasoline makes it there. I literally slide over the hood of my car, dive to the ground, grab the first flare, and throw it over into the median, followed by him grabbing the second and third, tossing it as well. Now, when it's all said and done, the two of us are standing there and realize that the gas was actually not even flowing in that direction. And yes, we overreacted, but all in all, this was still a fucked up situation to be in. So now the two of us recap exactly what the hell just happened. And according to him, he did not see it hit the truck because he was inside. All he saw was it come flying out of the woods, and in his exact words, he said it came flying through the trees like it had been kicked by a giant Bruce Lee. Its back was rounded, arms and legs forward. Listen, every part of my fiber, being and soul wanted me to lead this man right here on the side of the road. But according to rules and regulations, there was so much shit that needed to be done based on the amount of gas that was spilling. There was absolutely no way I was going anywhere. And what made it worse was the entire time that we were standing there talking, both of us had this feeling that we were being watched. So I followed the rules and regulations like I'm supposed to. I get the Department of Transportation out to the site, shut the lane completely down, and then they go through the process of cleaning everything up. And listen, even with all those people on the site, we're talking about before it was all said and done, 12 to 13 people are there. I still felt like something was there in those trees watching us. It was one of the most long, terrifying nights I ever experienced as a state trooper. A Dogman encounter happened early one morning. You see, as a trucker, I spend very long hours on the road. And oftentimes, I tend to push myself a little bit further than I need to when driving. This particular day, I'd been driving and started to feel sleepy. So I stopped at Love's truck stop, just off Highway 10 and 90. I got the truck backed in and situated, then climbed to the back seat and went to sleep. When I woke up, it was about 6:45 a.m. So I headed into Love's to grab the shower and some breakfast, coffee, and got back on the road. I was headed to Sierra Vista. As I got on the roadway, the sun was just rising. One of the best things about being a truck driver is the views. Since I was a little kid, I've absolutely loved taking long road trips, and I was always fascinated about the terrain and how it changes across the U.S. I turned, taking 90 south, heading towards Sierra Vista, traveling about 65 miles an hour. And just as I'm passing Cavern State Park, I see something leaping across the roadway on my left-hand side. As I got closer to it, this thing was standing in the median, looking at my truck. Then it takes one leap and clears the entire roadway. Now this is a 2-lane highway, 15 feet per lane at least, and about 8 feet on each side as a buffer. So this thing jumped damn near 40 to 50 feet. And when I say leaped, you should have seen the trajectory of this thing. It jumped up, and had I been closer, it would have easily cleared the hood of my rig. And what it looked like a giant black wolf is all I can tell you. Everything happened so fast, and I know this sounds crazy, but while it was in the air, I could have sworn as this thing took a quick glance at me. It freaked me completely the fuck out. I've heard people on these talk shows saying they go out looking for these creatures. Well, I'll tell you what I saw, no one should be looking for. The muscle mass on this thing was ridiculous. Its arms and shoulders, and I guess you would call it its thighs, were massive. And the speed at which it moved, like nothing I've ever seen. I did tap on my brakes and look through my side mirror once I passed that spot. And this thing was just walking off the roadway. It seemed like my presence didn't faze it at all. Nor did the presence of my truck. I'm not sure what it was or where it comes from, but I don't ever want to encounter that thing again.
In my early 20s, I worked for a company that had a contract with the U.S. government at the border. And no, I was not a Border Patrol agent. I worked as part of a maintenance program. My job was to maintain the border fences and manage crews of workers. Now, this job was intense. Not only did you have to contend with the weather, but there was a constant flow of illegal aliens and contraband across the border. The illegals posed a minor threat. Most of the times they would hide from you or run away. But the cartel and drug smugglers were a whole nother story. They would kill you at any moment. Although the job was dangerous, our company didn't permit us to carry firearms. However, my crew and I always carried a weapon because we figured our lives were more important than any job. I remember going through the safety training class and how the instructor would joke saying that we should stay in pairs of 2s and 3s. He would say 4 eyes are always better than 2. While in class, a few rumors began to circulate about reasons why this contract had such high turnover. There were some guys that got killed by the cartel, and other guys started seeing strange things in the sky at night. I pretty much heard it all over coffee and smoke breaks. Outside of the cartel business, I believed everything else was, but there was one exception. Nowadays, you call it Dogman. They didn't call it Dogman around the office, though. They called it DX587. So when people initially talked about it, I figured it was some kind of experimental weapon or a freaking robot that they used to patrol the border. We would have tailgate meetings in the morning, and our supervisor would say stuff like, "There are DX587s working in Zone 6. I want you guys to stay clear of that area and work Zone 4. They talked about it real casually, so I figured, hey, don't worry about it. Besides, most of the guys I worked with had never seen it. That was until one afternoon. 2 of my crew members and I were out in Zone 6 repairing the fence. Some illegals had taken a blowtorch to the fence, cutting through the 3 feet metal rods and creating a hole that you could simply drive a truck through. Until that day, I'd never seen DX587. Hell, to be honest with you, by that time, I figured the cartel had paid our supervisors to come up with this story about DX587 just to keep us out of the areas where they'd be trafficking the drugs through. I never actually imagined that DX587 actually existed, and it was a real threat. Back to what I was saying. We're in Zone 6, and I'm working a spider crane trying to replace the metal that had been damaged. Sandy and Brent, the other 2 guys with me, are trying to hold on to this rod and guide it into its foundation. That's when we see a group of people running towards us. It had to be 30 people, most of them men. They were running north towards the U.S. border. Now our viewpoint was elevated, so we had a damn good view of this. Sandy, one of the guys who had been working this area the longest, was one of those slow talkers, and he said, "Them people getting chased by something. I'm not sure what it is, but they running for their lives. It's time we get moving." The crowd was still a good distance away, and we decided we should start loading the truck. But that's when we started hearing screams and growling sounds. We all just stood there frozen, and it started to sink into us that this was DX587 at work. This creature actually existed. Through my binoculars, I could see what looked like 2 huge dogs chasing these people. At first, I just figured they were being chased by a pack of wild dogs. Very big dogs, but yet just wild dogs. That was until I saw one of the dogs stand up on his 2 hind legs. For a second, I thought I was tripping. So I threw the binoculars to Sandy, telling him to take a look and not telling him exactly what I saw. And at first, he thought it was funny. He said, "Look at them dogs, having a field day with them." Then he went silent and said, "What the hell? That ain't no dogs." That's when he tossed me the binoculars and started tightening the straps on the truck, and we left. When we returned to the yard, it was dark, but our manager was still there in the office. This is where the strange part really starts to happen. He apologizes to us and said, "You guys should not have been in Zone 6 today." He went on to explain that he made a mistake in his morning briefing. He then said, "What you saw today was DX587 that we've been trying to avoid. I'm happy you guys are safe, but I'm going to have to let you go." Now, at this point in time, I'm completely pissed off. I asked him, first of all, how did you know what we saw today? Because none of us told him what we saw. Secondly, how are you going to let me go because I saw something? I was just doing my job. That went absolutely nowhere. And yes, we were fired because of what we saw. I was given a $13,000 severance check the very next day. And when that finally calmed down, I approached my supervisor like a man and said, "Hey, what the f is all this about?" And that's when he tied it all in this neat knot. He simply said we would never get any work done if people really knew what was out there. In other words, we would pay it off to be silent and go away, so they can keep their government contract and have a steady flow of workers. Ain't that a...
Most people don't realize, but as a kid, you encounter things in life and you just don't know any better. Growing up on a reservation, I knew nothing other than the life that I lived. The extreme poverty, the crime, all of that stuff was normal. It wasn't until I became a grown man that I realized that the things that I saw and the things that I experienced on the reservation were so abnormal that it was mind-boggling. I'll give you an example. One night, my girlfriend and I go out into the woods to have a makeout session. Imagine a scene. It's a full moon. It's clear outside, no fog, no nothing. We're laying down on the ground, making out, when I hear this strange humming sound. Looking back on it as an adult, it's the exact same sound that people associate with UFOs. Nonetheless, we hear this strange metallic humming sound. Then there's these flashing white lights in the sky, but not like stars off in the distance, almost as if someone is taking photographs of us from the sky. It completely ruins the moment, spoils everything for the two of us. So now we start the process of walking back home. Mind you, when we walked into the woods, everything was peaceful, quiet, no problems. But walking back, it began to have this eerie feeling. Now, naturally, if you ever been in the woods before, you know you hit these cold spots and these warm spots, but this was a warm summer's night, and we started walking through these ice cold spots in the woods. And then it got to the point to where it seemed like it felt like those cold spots were actually following us. I distinctly remember her looking at me with this look of fear in her eyes. Me wanting to comfort her, but not knowing exactly what to do in this situation. I didn't want us to run because it was dark. We could fall and hurt ourselves. But I didn't want to stay, and I didn't want to move at the pace that we were currently moving. That's when we hear this roaring sound coming from behind us in the distance. Almost as if something prehistoric had been brought back to life and just dropped on earth right there behind us. Your natural instinct in a situation like that is to run. And so that's what we did. We ran through the woods as fast as we could, headed home. Now, as we're running along, I'm not absolutely sure if she saw this first or if it was me, but I started to notice these little glowing green eyes on the right and the left of us. And by green, I'm not talking about dollar bill money green. I'm talking about neon glowing sets of green eyes. And they are now running along the right hand and left hand side of us as we move down this trail. And that's when it happened. Another one of those flashes of bright lights. And the next thing I knew, I was strapped down to a metal table, unable to move. The only thing I could do was look left and right with my eyeballs. Imagine being in a full panic, laying on your back. You can't move no matter what you do. Only thing you can do is look around. And I'm looking to my right and I see her laying next to me, staring at me with tears rolling out of her eyes. Now, I can't tell you how long we laid on these tables, but what I can tell you for sure is the thing that walked into that room and stood over me looked exactly like what you described as a dogman. Jet black fur, giant yellow eyeballs, black pupils, and these ears that was abnormally long that set up on top of his head that seemed almost as if it was a part of some type of mask. The next thing I knew, I was experiencing this pain in my knee right below my kneecap. An excruciating pain, like something was being driven into my body. As that pain kicked in, it was almost as if it didn't want me to see what it was doing, because now my eyeballs are locked, looking straight forward at this metallic ceiling, and it starts to slowly morph and change into the nighttime sky. I can see the moon, I can see the stars, and everything around me begins to morph. First I see the sky, then I start to see trees, then I start to see brush. Then the next thing I know, I'm laying on the ground right next to her where we were. And she's there as well. The both of us stand up looking at each other, and I begin the process of asking her if she just experienced what I did, but she cannot talk. All she does is break down into tears. Under the circumstances, you would think that the first thing we wanted to do was to run back home. But honestly, we both were too afraid to run. We didn't know what was real. We didn't know what was fake. All we knew in that moment was that we had each other. So we sat right there on the ground, huddled up, holding on to each other for the rest of the night. And we didn't return back home until the sun was up in the air. Over the next couple of months, she and I grew further and further apart as she didn't want to discuss what we experienced. Then her family moved off the reservation.
Should know better, 'cause you always do this to me. Do this to me. But you stop to play. Later disbelieve what I done made. And I promise myself it would never happen again. But oh, here I stand, heartbroken and weary.
Perspective is everything. And what I mean is your perception of reality turns out to be your reality. And at this point in time in my life, in my reality, monsters did not exist. Or so I thought. Turns out, they did. And they were 100% savages. Now let me set this up for you. In college, I dated this chick named Keisha. Beautiful woman. Kind of woman you had to have confidence in order to be with. Because every time you turn around, some random dude was hitting on your girl, right? Keisha was black, but not really black like me. She was from Colorado, used to being outdoors, going hiking, mountain biking, whitewater river rafting. Real adventurous type chick is what she was. She came from a 2-parent household, black belt in martial arts. Keish was off the chain. Me, on the other hand, I was born and raised in the dirty South. Fishing was the most outdoors type stuff I did. So we had been dating for a few months. Keisha tells me she's got a surprise for me. Makes me wait 3 entire days before she hands me this freaking brochure for this camping site. Huge smile on this woman's face as she says, "Baby, we're taking our first outdoors adventure trip together." Now pause for a moment because I don't know if I adequately explained this to you at the beginning. I don't give a flying flip about being outdoors. Nor do I give a flying flip about adventuring, traveling, any of that. Just not my cup of tea. To be clear with you, this outdoors life that she loved was not my cup of tea. And talk about being disappointed. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were with someone, they were completely and totally ecstatic, I mean off the walls excited about doing something, but you, on the other hand, you find yourself not excited about it at all? This was that very same situation. See, a surprise to me was her putting on some kind of sexy lingerie for me to see her in, right? To me, that would be a surprise. Not going out into the woods, into some freaking cabin along the Sabine River. That's not a surprise for me. This was a surprise for her. And Keisha could tell by reading my body language that I was not excited whatsoever about going on this trip. So she starts to pour it on, using her feminine wiles on me. "Babe, I can think of a lot of things you and I could do together alone in a cabin in the woods, just the two of us. You really should think about going with me on this trip." And I'm gonna admit to you, like a lame sucker, I'm sitting up there thinking with the wrong head. My mind flashing to scenes of her and I alone in this cabin, her walking around with some sexy lingerie. I could get with that. I could definitely get with that. Now listen, I'm a grown man, and I'm not ashamed to say that the thought of having a sex weekend along with Keisha led me directly into the situation, because 2 days later, I find myself pulling up to a series of cabins in southwest Louisiana. The first thing I noticed was a sign on the gate that said that it closed at 10 p.m. Okay, thinking to myself, so we're about to be locked in this place. And the next thing I noticed is that we weren't the only people out there. Now let me lay it all out for you. The cabins were set up in a triangle, ours closest to the river, and the other two staggered to the left and right behind our cabin. Each cabin was raised over 7 feet in the air, and I guess that was for flooding purposes because we were right there along the river. Inside was 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms, living room, and kitchen. Now the first thing Keish wanted to do was go for a walk down to the river. Understand me, man. This woman moves like a whirlwind with hair. And so the next thing I knew, we had taken all of this stuff out of the Honda Accord, unpacked it, and we're down standing at the edge of this dirty river. I've never seen a woman get so excited about muddy water. But she was. Fast forward to sunset. We're outside grilling burgers and meet the couple staying in the other cabin. 2 middle-aged gay men. But these dudes were not like your typical gays. They were those manly gay guys. Both of them looked like freaking lumberjacks, 6'3", 6'4", hunting outfits on. These 2 guys look tough as nails. And for the record, let me remind you again about how I'm feeling. First of all, you are aware that I wasn't excited about taking this trip in the first place. And now my girlfriend is befriending 2 gay lumberjacks. I find myself sitting on the porch of this cabin, girl on my lap, beer in my hand, listening to the life story of Joey and Johnny, 2 6-foot-tall gay giants. And I'm not trying to sound insensitive, but I was not excited about this at all. Now remember, this whole trip was being sold to me as a couple's sex retreat. And up until this point, the only thing I've had was a couple of beers and a bunch of mosquito bites. The sun goes down, and this hanging out goes on for another 3 to 4 hours until finally, I've had enough. I stand up and say, guys, it's great hanging out with you, but I need to get some sleep. It's getting really late. Keisha and I head back into the cabin. I hop in the shower. It's going on about 10 a.m. I'm thinking I need to clean myself up, get it together before I start doing the do, right? Wrong, I come out of the bathroom and she is asleep, knocked out, laying across the bed on an angle. Now, I'm pissed. Listen, I'm supposed to be getting me some good nookie, but instead I spend all my time with 2 drunk gay lumberjacks. And now I'm supposed to sit here and look at all this sexiness and not violate this woman while she's drunk and asleep. I say to myself, I'm going back outside. Now I'm sitting there, outside on the porch in a chair. It's peaceful. Honestly, it really was. My mind starts to settle down. Yes, I was still mad, but my girl was having fun, and I had met 2 new good people. Grabbed another beer, opened it up, and decided that I was just going to chill and let it all go. Now listen to me, I can't tell you exactly when I fell asleep, but I can damn sure tell you what woke me up. It was the sound of something splashing into the water. Then another splash and another splash. My eyes now open but still kind of blurry. You can see in the moonlight something moving in the water. And as I rub my eyes, it becomes very clear. There are 3 huge animals swimming across the river. And listen to me, when I tell you they're moving fast on an angle, going away from me. I'm talking about this smooth, powerful, stroking motion through the water. And when they got close to land, I swear to you, it was like something out of a horror movie. You see these heads drop down under the water. And then these werewolf looking, man, I know it sounds crazy, but these come jumping out of the water, landing, standing on 2 legs, arms spread open, claws hanging down, and start looking around. Now, I'm on the porch, light off because the bugs have been eating my up, and I'm freaking terrified. These things are 9 and 10 feet tall, and they look pissed off. Black ears laid back down on the side of their head, yellow eyes glistening by the moonlight, and God, teeth so big I could see them from where I was sitting. They look over in my direction, then back across the water, drop down on all 4s, and take off running, passing right under the elevated cabin where Joey and Johnny were sleeping, growling and snapping at each other as they ran. A few minutes later, their porch light comes on and out walks Johnny with a shotgun. Now pause, this is going to sound real fun. At the same time, understand, I had just met those two people. I didn't know them well enough to draw the attention of whatever the hell those things were over to me. So I get my black ass up and tiptoe back inside that cabin. Now both king of the palace.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Dog Waters, and I'm back, firing on all cylinders, ready to go ham. Listen to me. As you guys have noticed, we had the front page or the home page of the website reorganized to make it a little bit easier for you to find the newest content versus some of the oldest content. You can see our sponsors. Click those links. Go holler at those people. They so kindly and graciously decided to sponsor a certain number of stories a month. So those of you who listen on YouTube can get a full story. I want to thank them for doing that. And guys, I want you to understand that we're getting ready to go in. Completely off the chain, release after release after release after release after release, then album after album after album. And I want you guys to know I really appreciate you. Now, for those of you who are not members of the Dark Waters family yet, I don't know what you're waiting on. You're not going to find this type of content just on YouTube narration channels. They don't care. They don't care enough to create this type of content. They don't care enough to get real stories. So if you're a high quality connoisseur of horror, this is the place for you. If you just want to listen to something to go to bed at night, go ahead and listen to that. But if you want to be scared, if you want to take a ride in your car on vacation and be entertained for hours, you need to be a member of IamDogWaters.com. It's only $4.99 a month. Get in there today.
Fist in the air to the flashlight. Yeah, hands up in the air till they gun me down. I keep it 100, they crunching the numbers. I'm fucking savage. I just might crash it. Really, I'm passive. Ready for the match. I just need cash me. I just want passion. No attraction. Baby, do that shit. So I'm savage. I just might crash it. Really, I'm passive. Ready for the match.
First of all, let's get you some breaking news coming out of Gabon, where soldiers have taken over the national radio station. They've criticised President Ali Bongo Ondimba, who's been out of the country for medical treatment since October. Ali Bongo recently addressed the country in a New Year's message from a hospital bed.
The message to the head of state, Ali Bongo Ondimba, is that the debate on his health has reinforced doubts about the president's ability to handle the heavy burden of the responsibilities of his office.
La patrie nous a tout donné.
The homeland has given us everything and made us the people we are. We cannot abandon it. So the patriotic movement of youth of the defense and security forces, in order to preserve the integrity of the country, has decided to take responsibility to stop the ongoing moves to seize power by those who, on the night of the disputed election in 2016, killed our young compatriots with the support of illegal and illegitimate institutions.
President Ali Bongo has been in power since 2009. Before that, his father, Omar Bongo, ruled the oil-rich nation for more than 40 years. The first obvious question, Nicholas, is what is going on? Is this a coup?
Well, Sammy, it appears like, at least it's an attempt to remove Ali Bongo, or the Bongo dynasty, like you mentioned, that has been in power for over half a century, out of power. And this is led by young military soldiers, young officers that took over the national radio station early this morning while people were listening to the morning news. Members of the Presidential Guard took over the radio, held journalists hostage, and read this message to the people of Gabon. In this address, they call this Operation Dignity. In this operation, they're calling for ordinary Gabonese, young Gabonese, to take up arms to take control of police stations, government office, in order to ensure that these presidential guards can remove Ali Bongo out of office. Now, they've called for the instauration of a transitional council for a return to democracy.
Before you can understand what led to my encounter with these creatures you call Dogman, and the man whose spirit was so dark that he was able to control them, first you need to understand what happened to my family. Why I left America and went back home to my native country, Gabon. And the most important thing you need to understand is why you have to leave these creatures alone. So a quick history lesson. I'm going to take you back. It's the night of February 17, 1964. My grandfather and 150 military officers start and successfully pull off a coup d'etat, taking over the Gabonese government. Of course, the question that comes to mind is, well, why would your grandfather do something like that? Now, I wasn't alive back then, but from what I've been told, they wanted independence from the grip of the French globalist government that had taken over Gabon. And they wanted to negotiate a trade deal that would allow the country of Gabon to use the natural resources in the way that it saw fit, a way that would benefit the people, and not the French government, mainly the oil reserves. Understand, a free Gabon, free from the political and economic arrangements with the French government, overnight will become the economic powerhouse of West Africa. It was when that thirst, that hunger for freedom began to boil and bubble up, that rumors started to spread. The Gabonese legislature was going to put everything to a vote, and if it passed, it would free us from the control of the French government. But before they could vote, President Mumbai dissolved the legislative branch. And it was that one decision by the president that led to the actions of my grandfather and 150 other men that night of February 17, 1964. President Mumbai was sent into exile, and Jean Abot was installed as president. 48 hours later, the French government discovered the coup, and with the use of military force, they reinstalled President Mumbai. It is here at this point that things take a turn for the worse for my entire bloodline. My grandfather was sentenced to 25 years hard labor. During the time of his sentencing, my grandmother was pregnant with my father and his twin brother. However, Mumbai was ruthless in his punishments, and the wives and children of everyone involved in the political coup were exiled to the bush. Imagine going from being the wife of a respected military leader to a peasant living in squalor overnight. Those were the conditions under which my father was raised. And with no way of supporting himself, he turned into the illegal oil refining business. In fact, my father was a pioneer. He made enough money to have a family of his own and support his mother. But it was dangerous work. And when he was 25 years old, his brother died in an explosion. Body consumed by fire. Then 2 weeks before my grandfather was to be released, he was murdered in prison. The word came down to our family that they were never going to let him go home. They just wanted to destroy him, give him hope, and watch that hope drain out of him as he lay there dying, bleeding out on the floor. Now, I was told that it was the death of my grandfather that spurred the decision to send me and my sister to America. And understand, before me going back home, all I knew was life in America, a place where a poor exiled boy from Gabon could go to school, join the military, and get an education. And I tell you, it would have been nice if the reason for my return home was a joyous one. But instead, I was asked to come home because my father had suddenly fallen ill. According to my mom, he got sick on June 6th at exactly 6 p.m. He was walking around as normal, fussing about the boys, making noise in the streets, when suddenly his eyes glossed over and he began to sweat. Then they rolled into the back of his head and he started convulsing. His body was knocked to the ground as if some invisible force pushed him down. Imagine being ill. One day you can walk and you can talk. The next day you can talk but you can't walk. And then the following day your legs work but your arms don't work. This illness that plagued my father seemed both natural and supernatural. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect when I arrived back in Gabon. I had seen pictures over the years of where my parents lived. That little village that I described to you in the brush had slowly took a life of its own and become a small town and then a city. Understand, it was nothing like the cities on the coast of Gabon. But at the same time, it was no longer just living in a brush either. Fields with palm trees ran everywhere. People driving on roads, small houses spread about. These were the dissidents, dropped in the middle of nowhere, giving nothing. And they had built an entire life for themselves. And it was amazing to see, especially knowing that my people had absolutely no help in developing it. At my father's house, I was greeted by a young man, 20 years of age. He smiles and says, "Your father will be happy to see you." And he was. Even though it was hard to look at him, his 50-year-old body looked 70 years old, weak and frail. But my mother looked strong, and she hugged me with tears running down her face for almost 10 minutes. It was not long after we separated from our hug that young man introduced himself to me as Axel, pulled me outside and began to explain to me what he thought happened to my father. My father's power had grown in that town. People looked to him as their leader, sort of an unofficial mayor. The people started discussing the building of a Christian church. And according to Axel, that's when all the problems began. Father had a meeting with the local witch doctor, which in turn led to them having a huge argument. Axel told me that he believed it was him, that witch doctor, that put a death curse on my father, using some of the most powerful blood magic. You see, around the same time they had that argument, 2 children went missing from the town. And when Axel and the other men of the town went searching the brush looking for the children, they reached this area where the magic was so strong. Shadows of these huge, wolf-like creatures could be seen walking on 2 legs. Now, pause for a second, because I need you to understand something. There's a huge difference between Gabonese culture and American culture. They both have forms of witchcraft, magic, and conjuring. The difference is in America, you see, in America, it's obvious that people are not educated in the ways of the occult and dark magic. So they fall victim to magic and dark forces that are openly on display. And by being openly on display, it makes it even more powerful. But in Gabon, my people have knowledge of dark magic, cannibalism, ritual sacrifice, blood curses. Axel went on to explain to me that this particular witch doctor was extremely powerful. He came from a bloodline of all witch doctors. They had handed down to him many secrets, and he was initiated into the old rites, old magic that had been around before the great floods. Understand, this man had eaten his own big toe, something that was only done as an initiate to the highest order of black magic. We sat there for hours as Axel broke it down to me. The only way to truly heal my father was to kill this man, because he was draining my father's life force. Now let me pause here again for a moment. I had basically been back home for the first time in my adult life. And this is what was awaiting me. The prospect of black magic and murder. Listen, it was too much for me in the moment. So I told Axel, listen, let me sleep on all this information and I'll get with you in the morning. Later that evening, I'm sitting at the dinner table with my mother, and she tells me the exact same thing that Axel did, but she elaborated more. She told me that 7 days after I was born, she had this dream that her son would be a warrior in a foreign land, then come home to save the entire village. My mother told me that before I was sent to America, that father had me blessed in this ritual, the same one he went through as a boy. A ritual designed to make a boy grow into a leader amongst men. You listening to me right now, each and every one of you have a mother. Do you remember a time where you saw your mother stressed? I mean, completely and totally stressed out. That's what I was seeing on my mom's face. Later that evening, she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. And looking over at her, I can see this was probably the first time in a long time that my mother had an opportunity simply to rest and be in peace. But later that night, my dreams were invaded by him. No one had told me his name, but somehow I knew it was Umboa, the witch doctor. He stood there in my dream looking at me, smoke rising from incense that burned in his hands. Skinny, skin black like thunderstorm clouds, eyes all white, the bones of children's fingers tied into a necklace around his neck. In my dream, this man spoke to me. Prodigal son, your father has no wealth, no health. I rule the spirits of the four winds. Go back to America before I kill you as I have killed your father. Listen to me. When I awoke from that dream, I knew this man was evil and he had to be killed. Morning comes and I awaken with a resolve unlike no other. And upon finding Axel, I tell him, we're going to find Umboa and we're going to kill him. His reply was that he needed about 24 hours to gather 2 men, weapons, and then we would head out into the brush. So I spent the rest of that day at my father's bedside with my mother, comforting him and talking to her. I don't know what you would call it. Maybe it was mother's intuition, but she knew I had decided to go after Umboa. Looking me straight in my eyes, she said, son, if you're going to go after him, you must be brave. He feeds on the fear of men, women, and children. However, if you are brave and remove all fear, there is nothing that he can do. The next morning, we departed. Myself, Axel, and 2 other men headed into the brush. AK-47s glistened like swords on their back in the early morning sunlight as we walked deeper and deeper into the jungle. Understand, fear is defined as an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger or pain. And terror is defined as extreme fear. There is no word in a dictionary that describes the feeling I had walking into the jungle. I served in Afghanistan, lost friends, took fire, but this was more than just being in physical danger. Goosebumps, cold spots in the middle of the jungle. It felt as if my soul was at stake. And the men with me seemed to feel it as well, eyes wide open, darting back and forth. The further Axel and I moved into the jungle, the more the 2 men we had with us started to lag behind. We had been moving for over an hour when one of the men finally said, I can go no further. This place is evil, old magic. I can feel it like spiders crawling all over my body. Axel pleaded with them, please, my brothers, for the sake of the children, follow us, come with us, fight with us. But in all actuality, this wasn't their fight. In that moment, standing there in the middle of the jungle, in that moment I understood clearer than ever that this was my fight, my battle, my family. So without a word, I turned and kept moving forward. Hours passed, Axel and I walking in the heat of the jungle. When he says, stop, stop, we're walking in circles. These are our own tracks. Understand, looking down at my compass, the entire time we had been walking, both of us were under the impression that we were moving north. But in Umboa's territory, nothing was as it seemed. It's the magic, I can feel it, says Axel with this look of fear on his face. Yes, I'll admit to you that I was afraid, but there was one thing that I knew for sure. If this in fact was his magic, then he had to be close by. And it was a few minutes after he and I had that conversation that things started to spin out of control. It was almost like time began to fast forward, the sun moving quickly across the sky, night falling in the area in which we stood. Suddenly it was dark. What made it worse? This was silent darkness, not dead silence, but muted silence. That type of muffled sound that you get submerged underwater. You can hear noises around you, but they're just not clear. Had Axel not been standing right there next to me, there would have been no way I knew if this was real or not. But what shook us out of the state of confusion and shock were these shrieking sounds. Sounds like nothing I've ever heard before that day. They sounded half human, half animal, this shrieking. And then these huge, gigantic shadows began to move, darting back and forth behind trees. Growls, snarls. The jungle was alive. What we were experiencing was the most powerful magic. We have to move forward, Axel. We must. Follow me. As I moved, the winds picked up, trees swayed from right to left. These creatures began to reveal themselves. Long black ears sitting on the top of their heads, snouts like dogs, growling and showing their teeth. Monstrous creatures that stood on their hind legs, 9 to 10 feet tall. Axel begins to scream, "You don't scare me, brother. Come out and show yourself. Don't be a coward, brother. Show yourself. Today you will die for what you have done to this family and the children of our village. Show yourself, brother." Understand, all the magic in the underworld wouldn't stop me from finding this man. The further we moved into the jungle, the stronger the winds became, the louder the screeching and growling turned. Again, Axel begins to taunt and provoke Umboa. "Show yourself, brother. Don't hide from us. Show yourself. We are not children. Show yourself, brother." Moments later, I hear this snarl, Axel screaming. Looking back, he has this gash on his shoulder, flesh torn from the bone. Pain so intense, he's dropped his weapon and fallen to the ground. Now it was my turn to speak to Umboa. "You coward. You hide in the darkness, stealing children, cursing men and women. But when a man comes to face you, you hide. Reveal yourself, you coward." You could now hear Axel's footsteps as he fled away, running through the jungle in pain. Finally alone, the wind stopped blowing. Not a sound. A few seconds later, I could hear something on all fours, charging straight at me, heavy, fast, galloping footsteps. And just as fast as this thing came running down on me, it stops. Standing there in the middle of the jungle alone, I knew he was there. I could feel him. But why wasn't he showing himself to me? Why all the games? Why all the illusions? Why send these creatures at me if he was so powerful? And it was in that moment that I realized that Umboa was more afraid of me than I was of him. Why else would he come to me in my dreams and threaten me? So I continued to walk forward, straight in the direction of that sound I just heard. And the further I moved forward, night began to turn back into day. The sun literally moving in reverse above my head and resting at 12 noon. That's when I first saw Umboa. And there he was, standing before me, just as they had described. Skinny, black skin like rolling thunderstorm clouds. His eyes fixed on me with this look of surprise, like he couldn't believe that I made my way to him. If he realized finally he had met someone who would not back down from him or his magic. Listen to me. This was no movie. There was no long conversation. I didn't need to know why he behaved the way he did or the reason why he did what he did to my father. And that day he died from one shot to the head, letting out this otherworldly scream as his body fell to the ground. I found myself overwhelmed with this feeling of relief, like I had been holding this invisible weight on my shoulder since I was a small child. But in a split second, that sense of relief turned into despair, because looking around, there they were, these wolf-like creatures standing on their hind legs. They glanced at his dead body, and then glanced at me, glanced at his body again, and then back to me. And as these creatures stood there glaring at me, my life began to flash before my eyes. I knew deep down inside there was no way that I was getting out of this situation alive. But suddenly these creatures began to lower their heads and then moving slowly back into the brush until they completely blended in. When I returned to town, the first thing I learned was that Axel was still alive. He was severely wounded, but yet he was still alive. And when I made it back home, my father was sitting there in a chair talking to my mother. For those of you listening, this is the story of my return to Gabon. A story that only the people of my town know of. A story that has never ever been shared before. And I seriously doubt if it will ever be shared again.
The Night Watch. Now let me tell you some things about me before I start sharing my story with you. Number one, I'm a black man. Number two, I grew up in New Orleans. Number three, I go to church every Sunday. And I work overnight at the Port of New Orleans as a security guard. Now my job pretty much consists of me walking the port and making sure no one is there that's not supposed to be there. It's an easy job, and once in a while a homeless person will get through one of the holes in the fence and try and take a rest. But it's so noisy that they move along on their own. So overall, this job is relatively unexciting. This particular morning, about 4:30 a.m., I'm walking along the rows of stacked up shipping containers when I see what I think is a person up ahead about 250 feet away. Now, if you're on site, you have to wear this reflective vest that allows people to see you. And this person didn't have on a vest, so I take off running after him. When I get to the area and look around, nobody's there. It's extremely loud. Trucks are passing by, so you can't really hear any footsteps or anything. But I know I saw someone. A few minutes later, I see what looks like a person standing on top of a stack of containers. These wings expand from his back, and the person flies up into the air. At this point in time, I'm like, hell no, that didn't happen. I must be tired. There's no way possible that this that I saw just happened. So I head back to my security booth, get me some coffee, and write it off as a hallucination. I'm in the booth when Trent, one of the other security guards, comes across the radio. He says, man, we got a dude out here walking along the stacks. Come meet me. We got to find him before he messes around and gets crushed out here and we lose our jobs. So I run back out to meet him, and we start looking around. Now, before we separate, I tell Trent what I saw, but I tell him about the dark figure that I saw walking. He confirms that this is exactly what he saw. I would say we had been separated about 20 minutes when he radios me again and says, bruh, bring your over here right now. You gotta get over here. I arrive and I see that there's this shipping container open. It's the third in a stack of 4 shipping containers, and we're both standing there tripping because there's no way for anyone to get that high up in the air and open one of these containers without heavy equipment. The crews that would do this were all on break. That's when we see these 2 glowing red eyes looking down at us from the open container. And then this thing flies out of it, hovers above us, looking down. Jet black, leathery looking skin with this elongated head like some kind of dinosaur or something. It flies up and then lands on top of the 4th container, folds its wings in, turns and walks away. We're both standing there like, what the hell do we do? And against my advice, Trent calls our supervisor, wakes him up at 5 a.m., telling him this wild, crazy story, and promptly gets cursed out. I head back to my guard shack and I stay put there until sunrise. Listen, I've seen this thing 5 or 6 times since then, but now I choose to ignore it. There's no way you can chase it because every time you chase after it, it just flies off. And it seems like it's not harming anyone. But Trend, on the other hand, is obsessed with this thing. He's tried to take pictures of it, but all he gets is these little black blurs moving away. I told him, stop telling everybody what he's seeing. Just keep his mouth closed. Because if he keeps talking, they're going to put us in a mental ward. But he doesn't care. He's a truther. He says the truth needs to get out there. But my argument is, you don't have any evidence to prove that is true.
So before I start this encounter, let me beg you not to judge me. Because some of the stuff I'm about to tell you is really funny. But it wasn't funny at the time because I needed help. For real. I mean, I really needed help. And thanks to my father, I got the help that I needed. And I no longer use drugs. But back then, I was on that flocka. I started using it while I was in prison for breaking and entering. And that's a whole entire another story. But when I got out, I was addicted. And the problem with flocka, it sends you through this cycle where you get high and at first you're jittery and anxious. Then you relax for about 30 minutes and next you get paranoid, like people are watching you, even when you're alone. When I was on that flocka, I would think that there were cameras in the outlet in the house. Then after you get past the paranoia, you become delusional. I mean, for real delusional, thinking that you got superhuman strength and that you can do anything. Now, it was important that I explained that to you so you can understand the dumb that I did. But it doesn't excuse it whatsoever. A little bit more about me. I'm a full-fledged country boy. Hell, as a kid I had shoes, but I refused to wear them. Ran around barefooted. Climbed trees barefooted. Went into the store barefooted. I'm the reason why they put the signs outside of the store that says no shoes, no shirt, no service. That's me. Our family has two houses on the property, one towards the front and one towards the back. Now, the house where I live on the back side is run down, and behind that house is nothing but woods and woods for miles. Well, this particular night, I'm high on that flock, and I'm going through the cycle that I told you about. I get to the paranoid part, and I feel like someone is outside watching me. Now, if you ever been high on drugs, even something as simple as weed, you know you gotta talk yourself through being high. Kind of to calm your nerves. So I'm walking around the house saying, Jim, ain't nobody out there in them woods, nobody's outside, you just being paranoid. And once we come down from this high, you need to leave this alone forever. Now understand, when I tell you flocka gets you high, it gets you high because I'm there in the house alone with no shirt on and no shoes, holding an entire conversation with myself, literally answering myself, saying, man, you're right, but every time I look out them windows, I see something moving. Now pause. Like I told you, I'm a country boy. We live in the country. There's no window blinds, no curtains, no shades, none of that. And I swear to you, I see what looks like a head pop up into the window, take a look, and then go back down. First I saw it when I was in the living room. Then I saw it again in the kitchen. And when I went to the bedroom to turn off the television, I saw it out the corner of my eye again. But you gotta understand, I'm high on that flocka and I know it. So I'm writing the whole thing off as I'm just being paranoid. But the next thing you know, that paranoia starts to intensify and I get thirsty. So now I'm in the kitchen getting me a glass of water. And I swear to you, I saw something move by the kitchen window. Scared the out of me. In my kitchen, there's a hole in the floor about the size of a dinner plate. So I turn off all the lights, lay down on the floor and listen through that hole. And now I'm hearing footsteps. But again, I'm high on that flocka. And I know it makes you paranoid. So I lay there on the floor, in the dark, on my stomach, for about 10 minutes, listening. And I can hear clear footsteps outside. And that's when one of the other side effects of that flocka kicks in. It causes you to get extremely relaxed. So now I'm laying on the floor next to this hole and all of my muscles begin to relax. My body starts to feel heavy. My lips are laying on the floor and I start drooling for about 5 minutes. But the entire time I'm laying there on the floor drooling, I still hear those footsteps. And again, I'm on that flocka and I've been on it for a long time. So I know I'm going through this relaxation phase. I'm coming out of the paranoia phase. So what I'm hearing is actually real. But right then and there's when the final phase of this high kicks in. And I like to call it the Superman phase. My brain starts talking. You done picked the wrong house to come around talking about robbing. Must be out your mind round here messing with me. Now I'm up, moving around, looking for my shotgun. I find the gun but drop the shells all over the ground. I'm in the bedroom. The only light on in the house is the light in the hallway. Imagine a scene. I'm there, bending down, picking up the shells when out of the corner of my eye, I see this head pop up again. And it looked to me like a damn Bigfoot head. We have them Bigfoots around here, and I have seen them Bigfoots. But again, let me remind you, I'm high on that flocker. So inside of my head, it's not right. I'm saying, this Bigfoot gonna come up here and run up on my house? No, I'm gonna go outside and I'm finna shoot you in the dick. So now I'm standing there loading the shotgun, walk out of the bedroom, turn off the lights in the hallway, go to the back side of the house, turn on the back floodlights, go to the front side of the house, turn on the front floodlights, head outside, make a left, go around the side of the house, and when I get to the side of my house, it ain't no damn Bigfoot. This thing is 7 feet tall, black as midnight, so black that the lights from the side of the house are hitting his fur, and it looks as if that light is being absorbed by this fur. Now looking at it, it's a black wolf standing on his hind legs with this gigantic snout, and this thing is looking at me like, what is your little about to do? Now let me pause right here in the story and say this to you and remind you again, I'm high on that flocker, nowhere near in my right mind. And my high ass decides to raise that shotgun, and I say out loud, if you don't get from around here, I'm gonna shoot you in your dick. And as I'm raising that shotgun, its demeanor changes, its lips curl up, showing its teeth, and you can see the intensity in its eyes change. But when I squeeze the trigger, I realize that I did not chamber a round. So now I am chambering a round, and it takes off running into the woods. And again, let me remind you, I'm high on that flocker, so I go chasing into the woods after it. Mind you, I have nothing on but a pair of shorts, and I run 25 to 30 yards into the damn woods chasing after this thing. Imagine the scene. I'm there in the darkness, that flocker is still in my head, making me think I'm invincible, and I hear this thing circling back, coming in my direction. So I head towards the sound. Now, when I get to that area, there's nothing there, but I hear it circling around behind me again. So I head back in that direction. Listen, I'm in the woods for a solid 10 minutes in pitch black darkness, looking for this thing. And then I start to hear this voice in the back of my head. It sounds like someone screaming underwater, trying to communicate with me. And I know what it is. It's my damn common sense trying to talk to me. That's what that flocker does to you. It suppresses all common sense. But I hear this screaming in the back of my head, and it gets louder and louder and louder and louder. And then it becomes clear, saying, hey, it's more than one of them out here. Now that's when I come down from that high and come back to all of my senses, looking around, and realize that I am outside in the dark in the night with a damn werewolf. And it may just be more than one. Listen to me when I tell you, reality hit me like somebody dropped a piano out a third-story window and smashed me to death. Turned around and ran my half naked into the house, turned off all the lights, made sure the doors were locked, and then I climbed into my attic and stayed there until morning. That following morning, over breakfast, I had a conversation with myself. And I realized I needed some damn help. This flocker had me all messed up. I could have died last night on this. So I hop in my truck, drive up to the front side of the property, knock on the door, and I sit down and I tell my father that I am addicted to drugs and I need help. But understand, we didn't have no money for rehab. So my loving father locked me into a bedroom for 15 days, fed me, and made sure that I was all right while I detoxed off that flocker. And understand, when you're detoxing off of something like this, you act absolutely crazy. That man, who I love with all my heart, went through that with me. And when the 15 days were over and I re-emerged from that room, As his son, he simply hugged me and told me that he loved me. 4 days later, he helped me get a job, and I've been off them drugs ever since.
Tonight, with the urgent search and rescue operation underway tonight after Hurricane Ida slammed into Louisiana, into New Orleans, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit. Hurricane Ida making landfall near Port Fourchon, Louisiana, as an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm, with winds 150 miles per hour and those reported wind gusts reaching 172 miles per hour. And then remaining a Category 4 storm for an astonishing 6 hours, tearing through southeast Louisiana, ripping parts of the city of Lockport to shreds. In New Orleans, the new levees after Katrina did hold. That was reassuring, but the city's reinforced power grid did not. Tonight, more than 1 million customers across Louisiana are without power, and the utility now warning it could take weeks to restore. Tonight, the images of the Coast Guard, the helicopters taking off as soon as they could to try to assess the damage, out searching for people who stayed in their homes. Reports some trapped in their attics for many hours, some waving to the Coast Guard above. Tonight, we know of at least 2 deaths. The governor saying tonight that we should be prepared for that number to rise.
Michael from the Cajun Navy offered to take us in.
This entire town is submerged. We're driving on the main street.
And there we saw a flotilla of small boats on the water, carrying out the stranded and the exhausted. And it was on dry land that we met these two.
You guys didn't expect it would be this bad, did
We didn't expect it to be this bad, and we stayed because we were in a 2-story home, and we thought we would have been safe. The rain just kept coming. It wouldn't stop coming. The rain wouldn't stop.
We pushed further into Laplace, seeing entire neighborhoods submerged. The stranded flagging down anyone with a boat.
Look where the line at. That's where the water was at.
Jackie and Denise Cooper's mother, Lucille, is disabled, and they asked me to help get her down the stairs.
You guys gonna come back?
No.
Did you think at any point that you might not make it?
Yeah.
Michael had gone back to get help. He needed more boats. Sure enough, within half an hour, he was back.
So I stayed here during Hurricane Ida. And by here, I mean Pearl River, Mississippi. My house sits on 5 acres of land, nothing fancy, just me here and my wife. After the storm, we ran our generators. It's hot as a dog's ass out here, but everything was going fine. It was a normal hurricane situation. And if you live in the southeastern portion of the United States, then you know life after a hurricane is uncomfortable, but it ain't the end of the world. As long as your house doesn't fall apart and you can generate some power, you can make it through it. Now, I believe the Dogman activity didn't start until the 3rd day of the power outage, and I'm pretty sure it had to do with me smoking a brisket in the backyard all night. Remember, I have a gas generator, so it's noisy. Now, let me paint a picture for you. This particular night, I go outside, my house is lit up, and up the road, my neighbor's house is lit up. There are clouds covering the moon, and we have absolutely no other sources of light, so it's freaking dark as hell. I'm walking up to my neighbor's house to carry him some vodka in exchange for some cigarettes. And the further I get away from the light of my house, the more unsafe I feel. Now you're naturally saying, fool, of course you feel unsafe. You're walking around at night in the dark. No, that's not true. I walk that road all the time headed to my neighbor's house. He walks the road coming to my house. And I can tell you, as long as I've been walking that road, I've never felt stalked like a predator was waiting on me or trying to eat me. But this time, it feels like something is out there in the tree line, even though I don't hear anything. I don't see anything. I can feel it. Now, back to the scene. I'm walking in the darkness to my neighbor's house. He's running a generator, has lights on at his property. If you're looking down on the situation from 30,000 feet in the air, I'm walking between basically 2 light sources. My eyes have now adjusted to the darkness, and I can see my neighbor's house with him standing out in the yard. Now I take my eyes off of him for a split second and he's gone. Thinking he done went into the garage, I just keep walking. And again, I want to be clear with you. I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, I don't smell anything, no noises, no sounds. And about 40 yards away from the light that his house is generating, that's when I hear him say, George, get down on the ground. Huh? But looking around, I don't see him. George, trust me, get down on the ground, get down now. So I drop down to the ground, and the next thing you know, blam, 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 blam. He's shooting right over my head. Now, if you've ever been hunting, you know what it sounds like when you shoot an animal, the sound of bullets hitting flesh. Well, I'm hearing that very, very close to me, combined with this groaning sound. Then he says, "Get up and run, run." Remember, I had that bottle of vodka in my hand when I hit the ground, it broke. So as I tried to get up and run, my feet slide on the glass. I start stumbling, sliding my body, twisting to the right. And that's when I see what he was shooting at. Listen, there's this bodybuilder that used to be out there. His name was Ronnie Coleman. The guy was a freak of nature. This was him with gray and black fur. And even in the dark, you can see the muscles under that hair. Giant pointy ears, this big old snout like a dog. And to this day, the most terrifying thing to me was how the light from the house picked up its eyes. It made them glisten as deep yellow and red. And I know, as I'm telling you right now, that I was scared and I could have been seeing things the wrong way, but it looked to me like the eyes themselves were yellow and the pupil was blood red. Look, after seeing that, my survival instincts kick in. Don't even remember how I got back to my feet. What I do remember is running and getting from the road to his yard, feeling like it was right behind me. Then I remember my neighbor stepping out from around the backside of his truck with his rifle, and his son coming out of the house with the rifle as well, asking what's going on. Then this overwhelming sense of panic assaulting my brain, because I realized I left my wife at home with the garage door open. And from there, things happen fast. So the next thing you know, the two of you are running outside to his truck, getting in, riding back down to my house, only to scare the shit out of my wife because absolutely nothing was going on at the house. Listen, that night I was so afraid when my wife went to bed, I stayed up, turned the freaking generator off because I wanted to be able to hear. And I sat in my garage all night with the door partially open, in the dark, listening. And let me tell you, there was not a freaking sound coming from outside. Then, about 2:30 a.m., this freaking helicopter starts flying circles around the area in a search pattern. Now remember, I said I thought this encounter had to do with me smoking brisket. Get this, that helicopter is circling, so I decided to step out of the garage to see exactly what's going on. But I didn't want to stand out on the road or in the driveway, so I go into my gate, into my backyard. I'm walking along in the dark, my focus is up on the sky on this helicopter, and that's when I bump into my grill. It's knocked over into the middle of the freaking yard, 150 feet away from where it belongs. The majority of the brisket is gone, but there is still some brisket on the ground, and my grill is all fucked up. That helicopter makes another circle, then it's gone. So I stay woke the rest of that night, and then I go through the process of shifting my sleep pattern to where I'm awake at night and asleep in the day until the power is restored. Now, you would think that me and my neighbor talked about this incident a whole hell of a lot, but no, we didn't, because we didn't know what to make of it. But we talked about it one time, just one time, and he explained to me that that thing was following me. When I told him about the brisket, he figured it was following me because I was going to lead it to more food. I told him I totally disagree. I thought that I was the more food.